Hello and welcome to the OMC video blog. This is number 2. This particular one, I thought about what I was going to do. I talked a little bit about it in the last one, but this time I think the topic I'm going to talk about today is going to be fairly interesting, at least to me, and I guess ultimately I do these because, they're interesting to me. But this one is going to be interesting because I'm going to talk a little bit about the story. Story in Skullforge, but more than that, a more general thing into how you adapt a story from a book or book, movie, or whatever, into a video game. Now, one of the biggest challenges we had in the beginning when we were first talking about Skullforge and making a game, just making a game in general, like we had decided, like we're going to make a game. The first question you ask yourself is, what's it going to be about? Like, why are you doing this, and what's the point? Now, in the beginning, we had decided that we were going to do some kind of RPG. That there was going to be a story of some kind. Like, we already knew this. We didn't know what or how or any of that. So I had an idea for a story. There's a particular character I had, which was Desi, and I had the beginnings of her story swirling around in my head. And so I knew kind of what we were thinking about, but I didn't know how to get it from where it was in my head into the game. And so one of the biggest challenges we had was trying to adapt that. And this is true for many video games, actually. And that's why this is more of a broader topic, which is taking your story and adapting it to a game. Now, we have to think about the differences in the mediums, right? So you think about books, you think about movies, you think about video games, and so each one of these tells their story in a different way. Now, movies and books generally do not have any input from the reader. When you read a book, you read what the author put down on the page, and from beginning to end, it is how the author tells you what happens, and then you just absorb all that, and that's it. You don't have any input. You can't tell the character, hey man, don't pick up that thing because it's a bomb, right? You know these things, and so as you're reading, it's how the author cleverly mixes in the suspense and the drama and gets the characters to do things and motivations and all that stuff. And then that linearly leads you to the final thing where it ends. One of the things that this is not quite true is with manga or comic book stories and stuff. A lot of times, like in those cases, they may lay out their story from the beginning to end, so the comic book will have a beginning and an end. But if you read a lot of manga, you find a lot of them, they're serialized, so that means week to week to week, things can change, and the author has a lot more flexibility to guide things based on reader input. So readers don't like one particular character, then they can be flexible enough to either write that character out or kill them off or whatever, and so that gives them a lot more feedback, a lot more flexibility to do what they want. Now, video games are a little bit more difficult to tell a story, which is why one of the big complaints you generally hear leveled at a video game is that the story was terrible. Like, video game stories are ass and that kind of thing. One of the main reasons for this is because video games allow the user to have some input in how it goes down, right? So when the story begins, so when if you first boot your game up and now you're getting into this, you can tell your story by having a cutscene or some text that shows up or something that will lay down the groundwork for what the basic story is. And then from that point on, the player is kind of guided through. Now, there are multiple ways to do that. You can tell your story linearly, where this event happens, then they play some game a little bit, and then that triggers something, and that happens, and then that something happens, and that triggers the next thing. And so it's linear, but the in-between is actually played by the character. And so that's one way to do it. And then, of course, you have the Mass Effect way, where you have the story is linearly told, but there are choices and branches where you can let the player navigate kind of where they want to go, like a choose your own adventure book, right? In those days, I don't know if you guys are old enough to know what a choose your own adventure book is. I don't even know if they still exist. I assume they do. I mean, I guess they do. One of the stories that I really liked were the Lone Wolf books. I loved those when I was growing up, and I used to map out like read and then I'm gonna do this, and then I think it had like a die roll and some stuff, and there was just a lot of stuff. But I really loved the flow of that, but you felt like you had more control over the story. The only problem with doing a story like that is that the story is largely open-ended, right? I mean, because you have to allow for the player to make choices. And that could be either done in a good way or bad way, And so, it's just one way that we go about telling the story and kind of how it goes, right? And so, yeah, it's trying to take those two different mediums of books and comic books and stuff, and then apply that into a game, and it becomes really difficult to do. I would say that at this point, I don't think there's any like foolproof way, like this is the best way to do it. I don't think that there's that yet. I don't think we hit that point. But games with stories tend to branch off in the different directions. So you've got your RPGs, which are really story focused, but generally give the player a little bit of leeway in how they do things. So Mass Effect, that kind of stuff. And then you've got your shooters, like your Call of Duties and whatever, and they have the story going on too. And then as you go through, you play out the story bits as things go on, right? So this mission is that first part of the story, then there's the betrayal or whatever, and now you're following that. Generally, you don't have a lot of flexibility as the player to decide, okay, I don't want to kill that guy, I want to do something else. But usually those stories are fairly linear, much like a book, right? The only problem is the only difference really is that you're playing the in-between parts. And that leads to the game part, right? One of the biggest things is the gamey side of games. I'm not going to lie, like one of the things that I hate the most is when the gamey side gets in the way. And what I mean by that is, have you ever been playing an RPG or a game or something, and they say, okay, we're going to fight this boss. You fight the boss, totally destroy the boss, like kick their ass everywhere, right? And feel pretty good about yourself, like you're like, yeah, I totally smashed that guy. But the story says, oh, no, you got your ass kicked, and all your guys are going, oh my God, we couldn't handle it, it was too powerful. You see it, like that disconnect, I feel like it creates, it's the gamey part of it getting in the way of the story part of it, right? And so the gamey parts are always going to be difficult because, well, they're the gamey parts, right? You want the player to have fun, right? I think somebody, I read somewhere that somebody was complaining that, in the Uncharted games, Nathan Drake kills like a ton of dudes, right? But when you think about it, you're only looking at the game part of that series, right? You're playing the middle part, so you're playing that part where dudes are just coming out in waves and you're just shooting them down, right? And if you think about that body count, then you think, well, gee, I just killed a whole fragging country just now. My body count is like, 100,000 high at this point, right? And so, you think about that and you go, okay, that doesn't make any damn sense, right? Because you're looking at the game part of it and then trying to match the game part to the story part. And those two parts a lot of times don't match. And I won't lie, that bothers the hell out of me. Like when I play through the game, like I want the game part and I want the story part to match as much as possible. But I know as a game developer, this is almost impossible to do because everybody's experience with the game part is going to be different. Not only that, but you've got people who have different skill levels, people who like to look at every nook and cranny. So there's some people who love to explore the whole zone or the whole area or whatever, level or whatever. And so they've just uncovered a lot more than somebody who was just trying to get from point A to point B because they just wanted the story. And so, as you can see, like trying to get all that to work is really difficult. It's not to say that it can't be done, but it is one of the more challenging things when you're writing your story for your game and then you're adapting that. Writing the story for your book or whatever, and then you're trying to adapt. Now, sometimes you can take that into consideration by saying, well, okay, look, I know that the gameplay is like this. So maybe I can try to match that gameplay with the story. So the gameplay and story match up in a way that's better for the player so that they don't get disconnected. But even then, I feel like this is especially true with RPGs. They just have a really bad habit of not connecting those things properly. And so I find that when that happens, I'm out of the whole narrative. Like my brain checks out. Or the other thing is when they ramp the drama up to 11 and then you're just like, okay, dude, that doesn't make a damn bit of sense, right? Like big, super huge thing comes out of nowhere. You had no idea who that boss was or why they're there or what's going on. And all of a sudden, bang, bang, this big boss comes out and now you're fighting them and you're going, where did that dude come from? Like, I don't remember hearing about that in the story. Or like, that there's going to be a fight there. So it just makes sense that there's a fight. And so you go, oh, I'm going to walk into this place. I've seen it a million times. It's going to be a boss fight right there. And then what do you know? A boss fight. So those are all the gamey things that come in. Or the one I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail. I'm actually going to save this for another video, and that's just to hit on it a little bit is when you've got your character's power versus the story. This is what I like to call the Superman effect. Like you've got that character that can be killed. They're super badass, and if some dude walked up, they'd go whack and then punch him in the face, and that would be it, right? Any boss that showed up, they'd be like, what are they gonna do? Like, what are they gonna do? And so when you have that super powerful character and you're trying to get that super powerful character to be for the character to believe that they could be beat up, right? It's one of the things, the big problems I had with the Spider-Man game, because I just thought, wow, here are a whole bunch of thugs that have like no power and no nothing, right? And I'm getting my ass kicked as Spidey because I don't have power X, Y, and Z, right? I'm still early in my gaming career as playing this game, and so I don't have the chops to do it. So my Spider-Man jumps in to a group of dudes that Spider-Man should be able to kick their ass without even thinking about, and I'm eating dirt, you know what I mean? And it's like, and a friend of mine said he played that game on easy just because it helps with the fantasy, and that is the thing, right? Like it's that the story part and the game part, you know, and what you know about those characters and how those things mesh, and walking that line it's a balance, right? That you have to find, right, so that it works for people to believe that such and such thing can happen. And so, yeah, you know, as you're messing around with this, you know, you're just trying to figure out like how to navigate that. And it's one of those things that when we were first starting with the story that we had to think about. So Skullforge itself is really about Desi, and it's about Desi's adventures after she escapes her slavery. I guess that's a known thing, right? I mean, she's a slave, used to be a slave. She breaks out of that and then decides that she's going to get revenge. The story is actually in two parts. You've got Desi's kind of her the early days, and that's what the Skullforge stories are about. Skullforge stories are about her early days, like how did she become Superman? You know, that's basically, I guess, the best way to describe it. How did she become Superman? Like, what happened to get her to that point? And then the game is she's now Superman, and now she's trying to solve this problem. And really, it's a revenge story. And so she's trying to get revenge on the guys that basically sold her out and treated her like dirt, right? The story is really, really, really dark. I decided that I wanted to have a dark story in the beginning. It wasn't intentional, though. It just kind of worked out that way. But I knew in the beginning, like once we had laid down, like this was the character we were going to use, this is the story as it is, right, or was at the time, and then how are we going to adapt those pieces to fit? Now, the original thought that I made is I was originally thinking, well, we play out the beginning of her story. But I realized that the beginning of her story is not going to work, because the beginning of her story, I feel like from a game standpoint, I would have to make it, I would have to gamify it a lot. And I feel like by gamifying it, it would lose some of its punch and some of the important things about it. So I felt like for that type of story, which is the origin story that is not really based on a game, you know, it's not written that way, it's not set up that way, it doesn't lend itself well to the game, then I felt like that needs to be more of a beginning. I'm just going to write that story. It doesn't have any player input, and this is how it works. Now, beyond that, the next part, I thought, well, what would make the best video game? Well, I mean, we think about what video games are. They're interactive. They give the player a lot of chances to manipulate, to move through the story. I thought about, were we going to do linear, like this happens and that happens and this happens, that happens. But then I decided, because I was fresh off Mass Effect at the time, which is why it's come up a few times, because that was kind of my inspiration in the beginning. But I thought that it would be even better if, as we laid out the story, the player ultimately gets to choose everything that happens in the middle of it. But the ending is set. So the beginning is set, and the ending is set. But all the things that happen in the middle, the player gets to choose. Now, the reason I did this is because I would love to write the story that happens after this. But I felt like if people who played, let's say you're one of those super fans, right? So you read all the books, you played the video game, you got to the end and went, okay, I'm ready for what's next. You get to the next part. And if you say, well, you know what? At the end of that game, I made X choice or Y choice. But when the book picks up, the book assumes that I made choice A, B, or C. And I feel like, okay, yeah, no. I want it to be a little more grounded than that. So therefore, I made it so that the player can choose everything that happens in the middle. Like, you can lay down your story as it's told, as you wanted to tell it. But when you get to the end, then that story is already set. And then that will lead to the next part. So anybody who got to the end will go, oh yeah, that's exactly how it ended. And then the next story will pick up right from there. And there won't be a disconnect, at least shouldn't be, as long as the story after that doesn't reference specific things in the main story. Because if you reference those things, then people go, well, I never did that, right? I didn't do that, right? At least we know what happened in the beginning, we know what happened in the end, and therefore beyond that, anybody who goes back to the story will go, oh yeah. Yeah. And then there are certain characters that are present through the whole course of the main story. So as we roll into the next story after that, well, then I can use those characters because they were there and they can't die. So therefore, we'll get to carry on. And I think that that's going to make a lot more interesting story. Now, some people may complain that they're like, well, I made a bunch of choices and my ending is totally the same as that guy over there who made a bunch of other choices. That's true. But, when you're making games, you got to make some concessions somewhere. I decided that I just wasn't going to mess with the beginning or the end. You can still make a bunch of choices and still end up at one point, right? It doesn't matter how you did it. Doesn't matter what happened. In the end, you still fell off the cliff. So, does all the other things that happened before then, does it really matter? No, because in the end, you still fell off the cliff. So, that's just one of those things that I decided. And so I think players are not going to care that much. Honestly, I think that everybody's going to be happy with all of the stuff they could choose in between. The other thing that I kind of want to hit on before we get to the end of this, before I wrap this up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the alignment factor. That is, your character has a personality. Let's say your character does. In my case, it does. Desi, she has a personality. She's Desi, right? And so she has a personality, but you still want people to make choices. See, the thing about Mass Effect is I felt like sometimes some of the choices were like, woo, dude, woo. But that's why they had kind of a good evil thing going on, right? But in this case, all of the choices that we presented to the player are all choices that Desi could make. Now let's think about this logically, right? If we think about, let's put this in D&D terms. Okay, let's suppose that you are, I don't know, lawful good, right? Let's say you're lawful good, you're going through life as a lawful good person. In your daily life, you can make tons of choices. And even some of those choices can ultimately end up being bad, even if you were thinking about doing the right thing. Even if you were totally down with doing the right thing and even did the right thing. But just because you made that choice doesn't mean that the people around you who are also good and evil and neutral and all that, and they'll take whatever you've done and then they can roll with that. So even if you think, yeah, well, I'm going to be the good guy, there are still choices to make, right? when you walk down a hall, you could decide to go left or right or down the stairs or whatever. Like when you go to have a cup of coffee, you can decide, hey, maybe I don't want creamer today, but maybe tomorrow you do. And so that's kind of the angle that we went with as far as how Desi makes choices and how the player can make choices. Desi's still Desi, right? There's no evil. She's not an evil character, so you're not making any evil choices. But that doesn't mean that there aren't tons of meaningful choices to make. I think when people play it, they're going to find that, wow, like there's a lot of stuff that you can change that is simple things, right? Simple. Asking the dude his name. Maybe the first time you meet him, you decide, I want to ask him what his name is this time. But the very act of not asking the guy his name is a choice that you made. And that choice can lead to other things. Later on, maybe you get somewhere and realize, oh my God, I never asked that dude his name. So the guy asks you, well, who was he? And you go, I don't know. I forgot to ask him his name. You know what I'm saying? Like those little choices along the way make for a more interesting story. And Desi is still Desi, right? So it's not, we didn't change Desi. Desi's still who she is, right? That's it. And I think that's going to make things a lot more interesting. And the story was adapted that way because I knew what I was trying to do in the beginning. And as we laid it all down and as we plopped everything down, that's how it all played out. And so I think if you are adapting your own story, it's easy for me to talk about mine because, well, I mean, it's mine, and so I kind of know what's going on there. But if you're adapting your own story to your game, I think that you first need to look at what your character is. First, look at the overall history of your character and your story and stuff, and actually find a spot that makes for a good game where you don't have to make so many gamey choices, and that disconnect between the player and the game and the story, right? You don't want to do that. Lay your story down in a better way so that you can work those kinks out like before you even got started. And that's why I even that choice between, do we start at her origin story or do we start in the middle someplace? I chose the middle choice because it just makes for a better game than the beginning, right? Even though the beginning would be an interesting game story, but as far as telling that story, it would be really difficult to do. And so as you are looking at your own story, take those things into consideration because I think that they'll make things a lot easier for you later on. And also a lot better for your players, right? Because your players aren't all going, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, but that didn't make any sense because I didn't do that, right? Or that character wouldn't get killed by that because they just wouldn't, right? And so, yeah, you just got to think about those things. And so, I put a lot of thought into how we were going to get there. But I like to think that we did a good job. I guess ultimately you guys are going to decide whether or not that was the right choice. But I think in my heart, I believe that's the right choice. But, when you're making a game or even when you're writing books or stories or whatever, you're always making those kind of choices. And you're just kind of going, well, okay, what's going to be the better choice for what we're actually trying to accomplish? And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But I do feel that ultimately planning is the most important thing. So plan accordingly if you know that that's what you're trying to do. You know what kind of story you're going to tell. You know who your characters are. And then build around that. And that way you don't leave the player in some kind of weird spot. I find that a lot of times game developers in general take that for granted or just assume that players are going to go, it's okay, no problem. They know it's a game, right? It's all right, it's a game. And they make those choices, but I feel like those things hurt sometimes. You know, they take the player out. And if you think about why did that player stop playing your game, maybe that's a reason. Maybe they got to that point and went, okay, man, I can't even believe that happened, and they just check out. Once they check out, they don't want to keep playing. So you gotta think about it in those terms, and I think by doing that, it'll make it a lot easier for you going forward. Anyway, I guess that's it for this particular blog. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I do want to just make one little announcement before we're all done. I decided that I am going to, on the weekend when I'm just bored sitting around doing nothing, I'm going to work on a little web novel. I already have the name for it. It's going to be Cyberpunk, because I told you last time I love Cyberpunk, and Eternal Darkness is my boy, and so we're going to do an Eternal Darkness story, and the name of it is going to be Aji, which is going to be, I don't want to explain what that means, but in Japanese, look it up, because this story is about vampires and cannibals. Yeah, it should be awesome. I think I'll just keep the story rolling. I'm not gonna, write like super long, huge chapters. Just little short, little things as we go on. And if you guys want to read it, then I guess I'll probably have the first chapter out maybe next week. I'm not gonna do a whole lot of editing, and I'm not gonna do a whole lot of that. I'm just gonna throw it up there, and you guys can just read it and enjoy it. Simple and easy, right? That's kind of how I want to do it. Anyway, on that note, I guess that's the end. Thanks for tuning in. I know this went just a little bit longer than I expected. I was thinking about 25 minutes, but yeah, maybe it went on a little longer, but that's okay. And appreciate everybody for stopping by and listening to what I had to say. And, if you guys have any game development questions or anything, feel free. Drop them down in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to talk about whatever. But make sure that you subscribe, like or dislike, subscribe, leave comments below, and I'll be more than happy to listen to whatever you guys, and I'll try to answer whatever questions I have. But you guys take care of yourself, and especially with all of these things going on in the world right now, remember your health is most important. Don't worry about all the rest of the stuff. Health number one. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.